Okay, Google, play Skeptoid by Brian Dunning.
I'm sorry, I don't seem to have anything called Skip Told by Mind Numbing.
Okay, Google, play The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe.
Okay, here's the latest episode of The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. The Skeptic's Guide number 655, January 27th, 2018.
You're listening to The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Your
okay,
escape.
Google, stop. Okay, Google, play The Skeptic Zone.
Okay, playing the Do Rights, J Zone plus Pablo Martin on YouTube.
What?
Just make it up.
Okay, Google, stop. Okay, Google, play The Skeptic Zone.
Okay, playing the Skeptic Zone on YouTube.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast with a little help from Google, I think. Show number 484 for the 28th of January 2018. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. Muggy, humid, moist, warm, wet, muggy, Sydney, Australia. I was at a social gathering yesterday with some of my colleagues from the TV and film business, and we're all walking around. You know how it is when it's really hot? You grab the front of your shirt and you flutter it back and forward. It was crazy. It's crazy muggy in Sydney, Australia, but never mind. Be glad you're where you are, unless you're in Sydney at the moment. Enough of the weather report. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to start with a report just in the newspapers today about anti-vaccination nurses being called to account. Now, over the last year or so, many anti-vaccination nurses have come to the attention of skeptics. And the story in today's paper is about one of them who is taking her own action to prevent further investigation or disciplinary action against her. A very interesting story and one very important to skeptics. And that's to kick off this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone. Following that, I catch up with an old friend of mine, Dr. Angie Mattke, who is an emergency physician. She's she's one of the women who looks after patients when they're brought in from the ambulances or whatever, straight into the ER. She's just the sort of person you really want to have on your side, her amazing skill and training. And the good news is that she's been appointed to be part of the Skeptrack at DragonCon, the amazing, incredible, indescribable science fiction and fantasy convention in Atlanta, Georgia, every year. So Angie's going to be on the line. She's going to tell us all about that, what to expect, what's it like, the benefits of having something like a skeptical outreach at a fantasy and science fiction convention. And also she'll discuss some of the superstitions regarding what she does, much like we had a couple of weeks ago with our friend Trish Han in the emergency departments and hospitals. What strange beliefs and superstition has Angie, Dr. Angela Mattke, encountered. Then to round off the show, another tribute to the late Barry Williams. Some of the Australian Skeptics Committee and some family and some friends over the years gathered for the funeral of Barry Williams just a few days ago. We heard stories from his days in the Royal Australian Air Force and other family stories. And our very own Tim Mendham gave a very touching review of Barry's life when it came to his skeptical work. And prompted by the sad passing of Barry Williams, I raided the archives down at the State Library here in Sydney, went through lots of microfilm, and I found various newspaper clippings that feature Barry, and discovered he was once on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. But I will read out a bit later on in the show an article dating way back to 1987 entitled "It's Fun to Shoot Down UFOs and Con Men." in profile Barry Williams. I think you'll enjoy that. But before we really get underway with this week's show, I thought I'd bring you up to date with the story that we recently ran about the skeptical community gathering or mustering its forces to support Britt Hermes, who you will remember is being sued by a naturopath in the United States, or the naturopaths in the United States. Britt's an American, but she's now living in Germany, in the beautiful city of Kiel, a city I know, it's lovely up there, right up in the north bit of Germany. And recently, under the leadership of Eran Segev, the president of Australian Skeptics, an international there's been an international response, I guess you'd say, a call to arms to help Britt fight this case via donations to a legal fighting fund. And as reported at skeptics.com.au, with an update on the 22nd of January, we are very excited to announce that our campaign to support skeptical campaigner Britt Hermes has achieved its initial goal. As of 11:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, or 12:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, the fundraising campaign organised by Australian Skeptics Inc., ASI, has raised more than $80,000 Australian, or about 50,000 euros, in more than 2,000 donations from around the world in less than 9 days. The campaign goal of at least $80,000 is the amount Britt's lawyer has advised would likely be required. But the fundraising doesn't stop. Considering the unpredictable nature of legal costs, the final amount required may vary. We need to raise enough to ensure that Britt is not out of pocket and definitely not silenced by the defamation action. So there you are, folks. More information at skeptics.com.au. But all those people listening who supported this campaign by donations, wow, a big thank you. And it really does show dramatically that the worldwide skeptical movement can make a difference and can come to support of skeptics who really need it. Well done. Great news. And again, we'll keep you updated. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have a cup of lemon tea with ginger, because I think I'm just starting to get the very, very beginning of a skeptical cold or something. I'm not sure. I hope not. There's nothing worse than having a cold in steamy, hot, muggy weather. I better run downstairs and do that. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Here's a story brought to my attention by Heidi Robinson, the Raw Skeptic, and this is reported in the Daily Telegraph newspaper, and also I notice in the Courier-Mail. The story by Vanda Carson. 18 nurses face disciplinary action after anti-vax comments on Facebook. 18 nurses are facing possible disciplinary action for allegedly posting anti-vaccination comments on Facebook after a pro-vaccination campaigner reported them to the health watchdog. Details of the investigation into the nurses' actions were revealed in the Supreme Court in Brisbane as part of a legal bid by a Sunshine Coast nurse and midwife to block disciplinary action over accusations she acted unprofessionally by posting anti-vaccination comments on Facebook. The group of nurses who were reported to the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Agency, AHPRA, in May 2016, face restrictions on their nursing registration if they are found to have engaged in, quote, unsatisfactory, end quote, professional conduct. The nurses have been told by the healthcare watchdog that they can be investigated for their actions beyond the care of patients. Sunshine Beach nurse Elizabeth Jane Craig has been told by the AHPRA that she is facing a possible caution and could be forced to study, quote, evidence-based practice, end quote, after she posted, quote, numerous anti-vaccination statements, end quote, online, quote, including a post in which you state that the vaccines are Satan's latest plan to take and change human DNA, end quote. In a letter to Ms. Craig on December the 5th last year, AHPRA told her that the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia believed her, quote, conduct is or may be unsatisfactory, end quote. Quote, you promote the use of religious belief to gain exemption from vaccination by way of a comment on the post, end quote, AHPRA states in its letter. Quote, your Facebook profile, as at 21st of May 2016, identifies that you have completed nursing and midwifery qualifications, and in a comment on a post on the 24th of March 2014, you advise you work for Queensland Health. It is considered likely that you would have been required to provide advice and or administer vaccines as part of your role as a nurse or midwife, end quote, the letter states. AHPRA said her actions showed an, quote, apparent lack of insight, end quote, and a possible breach of the code of conduct and the social media policy. Ms. Craig was told she had until January 8 to respond to the complaint, but instead has gone to the Supreme Court in Brisbane seeking judicial review. Her case is due in court tomorrow, that being the 29th of January. She told the court that, quote, there is no evidence to support that a reasonable person would identify me as providing a health service or giving clinical advice. I deny I have ever promoted an anti-vaccination stance, end quote, she told the court. She claims that the whistleblower who reported her has, quote, misrepresented, end quote, her Facebook posts as, quote, professional conduct, end quote, when they were, quote, under my personal name, end quote. Ms. Craig claims that if a condition were placed on her registration, it would have, quote, long-term professional, personal, and employment consequences, end quote. The anonymous complaint, filed in court, states that Ms. Craig, quote, is a long-term member of the rabidly anti-vaccination secret Facebook group Vaccine Choice Australia, end quote, and advised the anti-vaxxer mother of a 1-week-old baby in February 2016 that her breast milk, quote, provides immunity, end quote. The complainant also states that Craig shared anti-vaccination posts and, quote, promoted, end quote, a, quote, discredited anti-vaccination activist, end quote, and asked another Facebook user not to post the name of an anti-vaccination midwife working at Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. It is not the first time Ms. Craig has been reported to nursing regulators. In August 2014, she was cautioned after her comments on Facebook giving advice to other anti-vaxxers to avoid mandatory workplace jabs for hepatitis B by claiming, quote, religious, end quote, objection, were found to be, quote, unsatisfactory, end quote. Court documents state that in October 2016, the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia told its members it had become aware that a, quote, small number, end quote, of nurses and midwives were, quote, promoting anti-vaccination statements to patients and the public via social media, which contradict the best available scientific evidence, end quote. The board told members that the AHPRA has the power to, quote, prosecute, end quote, nurses who distribute false or misleading anti-vaccination material. And that story has been published in various newspapers, including the Courier-Mail, and we will keep you up to date as this story develops.
Hi, this is Dr. Pamela Gay from Astronomy Cast. Each week, Fraser Kane and I take our listeners on a fact-based journey through the cosmos. With our weekly podcast, we explain not just what we know, but how we know what we know about this universe that we share. Check us out at astronomycast.com and look for us in iTunes, Google Play, and wherever you download podcasts. See you online.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Hello.
And joining me now all the way from beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, it's an old friend of mine, Dr. Angie Mattke. Hello, Dr. Angie.
Hey, good morning, Richard, or afternoon, or whatever it is there.
It's
good to talk to you.
It's strangely enough, it's morning. It's and I think it's afternoon where you are.
It is. It's mid-afternoon here.
Oh, that's wonderful. I thought I'd give you a call, contact you, because I saw just recently, and you were putting this about, that you are now quite involved in the wonderful Dragon Con in Atlanta, Georgia, which is on the Labor Day long weekend in the United States, involved with Derek Colanduno to run the Skeptrack. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Derek has done such a great job with the Skeptrack and has brought so many new people into the skepticism, including me, actually. But it's a big job, and he needed some help. And so I am now the assistant director for the track. And we are very excited about this year. I can't wait. We're trying to get you to come. Jamie and Swiss is already confirmed, and we're still working on getting folks into the roster so that we can have the best Dragon Con Skeptrack ever.
Now, for those of you who haven't been to Dragon Con, and I have not been myself since 2010. And, of course, Dragon Con in 2008 was the very first time the Skeptic Zone was recorded. What can you tell people? What's it like, Dragon Con in general and the Skeptic Track in particular?
Well, it's funny because Dragon Con itself is probably the biggest spectacle that I've ever seen. And believe me, I've seen some. But and it seems sort of like that between the Skeptrack, the science track, those seem to sort of be the calm in the middle of a storm. But there are so many opportunities to indulge your love for any particular fandom. BBC fandom, you've got the Doctor Who, the Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, gamers, costumers, video game. I mean, like just everything you can think of. This is the world's repository of pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, with a good bit of rock and roll thrown in there for good measure.
That's not bad. That's not a bad description. What caught my attention the times I went all those years ago was the sheer volume of geeks dressed up in elaborate costumes. It was just astonishing.
It really is. And it's one of the things I really love about Dragon Con. I think that there is a lack of passion anymore. People who have passion for things, for these whole universes of fandom, they don't really have a whole lot of places that they can share their passions with others. And Dragon Con is one of the few that you can really indulge your passion. And I kind of don't costume because they are so far out of my league. So I just go and when I go, I really enjoy seeing the passion that people have applied to their costumes, and they bring more than one. That's the other thing I find just amazing. People will have 2 costumes a day. They'll have 2 wardrobe changes a day, and they have devoted so much time and energy into producing either a very creative mashup or a very high fidelity version of a particular costume. It's really amazing.
It really is. And what I loved about it, of course, the times I went, was taking part in the Skeptrack with Derek and lots of old friends. And it was a fantastic opportunity because we would set up our sessions and I would give a talk or there'd be a panel or something like that. And a lot of the audience would be people just drifting in or saw it on the itinerary and came in out of curiosity. So we got a lot of people who were introduced to skepticism, and I think that's probably the case ever since Skeptrack began all those years ago. And I thought that was a really, really worthwhile thing. I mean, there were skeptics in the audience. Some people go there because they know what to expect. But all those other strange people in their costumes wandering in and sitting down, being introduced to skepticism. And I think that's probably the first time I met you, was probably there.
It was, as a matter of fact. I don't know if you were there. I don't remember seeing her last year, but the Flying Spaghetti Monster often will stop by to the Skeptrack and take photos. And of course, Margaret Downey arranges our section of the parade now. We have, often we'll have cars that we can drive a particular luminary. I've driven James Randi twice now in the parade. And that gets the message of questioning beliefs out to the larger audience, especially since now they're televising the parades. And so we're able to give kudos to people who have been skeptics throughout history, and just other regular messages of question things. So there are so many opportunities for outreach there. It's just staggering. The really nice thing about the Skeptrack, and I think one of the things you alluded to, is that it's really sort of in the middle of everything. As people are walking through from one hotel to another, it's really well situated and pretty easy to get to from other parts of the convention. And so I think that is one of the reasons for its initial success, was because people could just kind of wander in there when they saw something interesting on the schedule. It's not something you had to hunt for, like on the bowels of the Hyatt, who was pretty much for the most committed of fans.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, of course, because I'm saying these strange people sort of drift in, and I don't mean strange in a bad way. They're just dressed bizarrely as characters from everything you can possibly imagine, from Doctor Who to Star Wars to comic books that I'm unfamiliar with. Elaborate costumes, huge costumes. Sometimes you can't even get into the elevator because they're full of Wookiees and angels and
and pointy things. Yes, you have to be careful of the pointy things.
You do have to be careful. Axes and swords and saying before, the sheer volume of people over many, many mega giant hotels. It's quite a spectacle.
The convention has taken over 5 major hotels in downtown Atlanta. Dragon Con has become a fixture in Atlanta society. The mayor has given Dragon Con award. There are special banners. We get our own wall in the Atlanta airport as you're coming up from baggage, to go into the baggage claim. As you're coming up the large escalators, everyone goes past this whole billboard, which is in the world's busiest airport, and it's all about Dragon Con. It welcomes Dragon Con to Atlanta.
I'm not surprised. The income for the city of Atlanta must be extraordinary. Now, I hope I can make it. No promises at this early stage. I miss it every year. It comes around, and I just wish I could be there. Folks, if you want to have a flavour of what it's like, and if you haven't been there, I think YouTube's the best. Just go to YouTube and look up Dragon Con, and you'll get a taste of the non-stop bizarreness of this wonderful convention.
It does not, it can't, it doesn't even hold a candle to actually being there, to seeing things in person. You can examine the details on the costumes, just to stand at the top of the Marriott and look down at this sea of people.
Yeah.
I'll never forget this one time we were standing up at the top and looking down, and there were these 2 huge walking dinosaur bones, skeletons. It was sort of it was an articulated dinosaur skeleton, and it was easily 20 feet long. It was enormous.
Yes, that's absolutely typical of the sort of things you'll see at Dragon Con. And again, it's full of very passionate people who love science fiction and fantasy. And that sort of ties in so well, because there's also other tracks there, like the science track, for example, where it's just dedicated to scientific research and all that sort of stuff. And the other track which is close to my heart, which I took part in when I was there, was the Silk Road, which is sort of like Asian culture, which I was able to demonstrate origami there and give lessons and take part in that. So, yes, a lot of reasons for me to try and get back, Angie, I think.
Oh, agreed. Please, please, please try to come back, Richard. We miss you.
Thank you. Now, something else I'll ask you about, because a couple of weeks on the Skeptic Zone, listeners will remember we spoke to Trish Han, who works at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital here in Sydney, and she was talking about some of the odd superstitions and practices she's seen in the emergency department. When people come in, they may refuse to take off a crucifix for an X-ray, for example, because their superstitious beliefs compel them to hang on to it, and you can sort of understand that in a way. You must have come across some interesting cases in your line, which is very similar. But I wonder, have you seen that sort of thing? Or is it more that you come across people who maybe indulge in alternative medicine, which could be a problem?
Well, I do see the alternative medicine thing a fair amount. And I do have to choose my words carefully because I do not wish to offend my patients.
Of course.
I also don't wish them to be taken advantage of by charlatans who are trying to sell them nonsense. So I try very hard to be judicious in the things that I address. Now, I have to give you credit, and I think I've told this story before. I had a patient who was wearing a power band bracelet, and I believe he was having an allergic reaction to the bracelet.
Wow. And
he explained about the demonstration he had seen, and I showed him using my stethoscope as the talisman about how he had been deceived, and he tore the bracelet off and threw it away.
Wow, that's
and
good.
So I have to thank you for that because I think you may have helped clear up his skin condition. But has been one direct way I could demonstrate that this is actually not a helpful thing. The superstitions that I bump into, I hear from staff a lot about the full moon being a poor harbinger of bad night. Even though I've tried to explain, it doesn't really seem to. When you do a double-blind study, and then I go try to explain about cognitive bias, and they just aren't interested because that's what they always learned.
Yeah.
So I hear that one a lot. And I've heard about people being called black clouds, that whenever they're on shift, bad things seem to happen. I can't say that there aren't people who don't create drama, but I can't say that that there's a superstitious element to it in those cases. But I don't really bump up against a whole lot of the superstition, partly because as an emergency physician, my time with them is often limited and we don't get to delve that deeply into those things. But I'm not at all surprised if that radiologist was finding those patients resistant to taking off particular pieces of jewelry. I have had, actually, now that you mention it, I did have a couple of patients with rings that they did not want removed when it was painfully obvious they would lose their fingers if we did not remove the rings.
Wow.
And so there was a little bit of resistance there, but I was able to persuade them that it was the way to save their fingers. So I think that's only happened twice in my career, though.
Well, I imagine that, yes, there would be certain similarities, I think, in any hospital. Or tell me something, now that I think of it, and I'm thinking of what Trish Han was discussing with me a few weeks ago, does the number 13 come up as in there are no wards 13 or beds 13 in your hospitals?
The hospitals where I've worked, there have pretty much always been a bed 13. I can't think of any where 13 has been a number that's been a problem.
Good. Well, that's something good to know, because occasionally in hospitals that still crops up.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have our specialty society meetings in hotels, and I have been in hotels where there was no floor 13.
Oh, that's Las Vegas for you.
Exactly. That was precisely what I was thinking of.
Yeah, when we go to meetings, SciCon last year, and the amazing meeting for many years, many of those hotels simply don't have a level 13.
Right.
Well, I hope that the hotels in Atlanta, Georgia at least have a 13th level, and I hope I get to stay on one of those 13th level later in the year. Angie, how can people find out more about the Skeptrack at DragonCon?
DragonCon.com would probably be your best resource.
Okay, folks, there's the word, and I'll link to that in the show notes, plus the link for the Skeptrack. Again, thanks to the ongoing efforts of Derek Colanduno, who's been tirelessly working for that for many years, and now I'm so pleased that you're on board too, Angie, because I know you'll add a certain, shall I say, style to the occasion.
Oh, well, that's very sweet of you to say. It really is a group effort, though. This is a labor of love for us. The con is run by volunteers overwhelmingly, and they do a wonderful job. People donate their personal time, money, resources to produce the best convention possible for everyone involved.
Absolutely. What a lot of fun it is too. Again, well, who knows,
yeah.
maybe I can come along and be skeptical there at DragonCon once again. Angie.
Oh, I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Dr. Angie Mattke, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, hi, Maynard.
Oh, hi, Heidi. Great day in this park.
Yeah, if you like that sort of thing.
Look over there. A yowie.
There are no such things as yowies, silly.
Might be just a dog. A big dog. I think it's a King Charles Spaniel thing. No. It's a yowie.
Maynard, if it's a choice between it being a dog or a yowie...
No. It's a yowie. Yowie. Argument from authority. It's a yowie.
Hey, you two, what are you arguing about?
Maynard thinks that dog-looking thing over there is a yowie.
A yowie?
Or maybe Chewbacca the Wookiee?
I see. Okay, we better look this up in the Skeptics Dictionary online.
The
what?
The Skeptics Dictionary online. It features definitions, arguments, and essays on hundreds of strange beliefs, amusing descriptions, and dangerous delusions. It also features dozens of entries on logical fallacies, cognitive biases, perception, science, and philosophy. It's at www.skepdic.com.
Right, Heidi. Prepared to be amazed.
Okay, yowie. Here it is. It's under Bigfoot. It says... Most scientists discount the evidence of Bigfoot because the evidence supporting belief in the survival of a prehistoric biped ape-like creature of such dimensions is scant.
You know, maybe that is just... Oh, hang on. Oh, okay. That is just... it's just Chewbacca after all.
Here, Chewie, come on. Here, Chewie.
Thank you, Skeptics Dictionary Online.
From the Sydney Morning Herald newspaper, published August the 13th, 1987. Ian Cockerill meets the self-appointed watchdog for the blindly trusting. It's fun to shoot down UFOs and con men. In profile, Barry Williams. Believe it or not, Mr. Barry Williams is mainly in it for the fun. It may be little comfort for the unscrupulous magicians or the gurus of the pseudo-religions, but it is amusing for those who have seen the national president of the Australian Skeptics in action. Mr. Williams enjoys exposing charlatans, not in a malicious way, but methodically. The 48-year-old Roseville man places his faith in things that are supported by scientific evidence and scrutiny. His 600-strong organization is the self-appointed watchdog for the blindly trusting. It tackles people who would seek to profit from the ingenuous among us. But it is also a voluntary organization whose members share a fascination for the infinite gullibility of mankind and the subjects which snare people's interests and money. 1/5 of the members live on Sydney's North Shore. Quote, "I find it intellectually stimulating and a lot of fun," end quote, said Mr. Williams, a trade exhibition promoter. Quote, "I've built up an immense library since joining the Skeptics and, if I didn't have scruples myself, with the things I've seen I could become enormously wealthy. In fact, we joke at the branch meetings about setting up a religious or psychic body to make our fortunes," end quote. The Australian Skeptics were formed in 1981. Prompted by a UFO sighting in New Zealand, Dick Smith, Philip Adams and Mark Plummer decided to organise a body to investigate such claims. Smith and Adams, with the former head of the CSIRO, Dr. Paul Wild, remained the patrons. Quote, "I had the first inkling I was a skeptic when I read Chariots of the Gods," end quote, Mr. Williams said. Quote, "I thought it was fascinating until I got to the bit about the pyramids. I then remember thinking, this is tripe. Later I was watching Dick Smith being interviewed about UFOs and I began to think, was I the only person who didn't believe in them? Then Dick said it was time somebody challenged the existence of things like UFOs. I wrote to him saying that if he ever got something off the ground, I was interested. I have a natural antipathy for being ripped off by charlatans." The Skeptics' targets range from psychics to astrologers and fringe religious organisations. Quote, "We mainly concern ourselves with paranormal events and pseudoscience," end quote, Mr. Williams said. Quote, "Currently there is a fad on channeling, which is really a high-tech name for spiritualism. Astrology seems to be on the wane, although there are still those who firmly believe in it. At our national convention in Melbourne last year, we had our members collect all the astrological charts for 1 week, and of course, they were all different. We tend to steer clear of religions, except for the creation science people and the Scientologists. But in taking on those, we have the support of the major churches. We are not vindictive about it. A lot of psychics sincerely believe they have some sort of power. But there are the ones who get away from reading tea leaves and are well aware what they do, taking people's money. Quote, "It can be dangerous. Just look at the tragic case in Newport recently, when a guy cut his hand off in the belief it would release him for astral travelling. It's tough enough in this world as it is, without being conned all the time." End quote. To make it tougher on the tricksters, the Australian Skeptics have put up $20,000 for anybody who can perform a paranormal act under scientific scrutiny. With its American parent organisation, the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, and branches in other countries, the group has more than $250,000 on offer worldwide to anybody willing to accept the challenge. Quote, "Not surprisingly, nobody has been able to prove they have these powers," end quote, Mr. Williams said. Quote, "Fortunately, we have no really bad practitioners in this country. Australians tend to be more sceptical, by and large, than other races. It's a healthy state of mind. But I think our education system is to blame for not teaching kids to examine critically things presented to them. And the media is partly to blame for reporting sensational stories. Just look at that woman who claimed she knew where the Colossus of Rhodes was. We've locked horns with her before. It turned out to be something some Greek travel agent had dreamed up." End quote. To demonstrate how readily people accept the credentials of those claiming psychic powers, the Skeptics perpetuated a hoax a few years ago when they brought over a magician member from America. He was touted as a psychic and appeared twice on the Bert Newton television show before revealing the fraud on his third appearance. Quote, "The switchboard was jammed with complaints from people annoyed at being conned," end quote, Mr. Williams said. Quote, "They didn't thank him for helping to show them how easy it was to be taken in by a good con man couching things in exotic jargon," end quote. And that story was published in the Sydney Morning Herald way back on the 13th of August 1987 by Ian Cockerill. And it certainly sums up the Barry Williams we all knew. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. And thank you to the people who did actually gather the other day to farewell Barry Williams. And he's a man who won't easily be forgotten, if ever. Coming up on next week's show, we hope to have Maynard once again reporting from Skeptics in the Pub here in Sydney. And he'll be asking the big question, answers on a postcard. I'm not sure. We always make up the big question for Maynard just before Skeptics in the Pub anyway. But if you're in Sydney, first Thursday of the month at the Occidental Hotel down at Wynyard, kicking off around 5-6 p.m, we'd love to see you. And now, by request, another dice game. This is where I toss a dice and you use your psychic prediction powers to predict what the number will be. This time, in my recent trip to the United States, I went to a games store in Berkeley, in California, and I bought myself a 60-sided dice. Yes, there is such a thing. I have it right here on the table. It's ridiculous. So, predict away. Predict away. A number from 1 to 60. Are you predicting? Are you predicting? Have you got that number? All right, here we go. It fell off the table. Here we go again. It's coming to a rest on number 27. For all you people who got 27, well done. Let's do it one more time. Here we go. Number 30. Oh, why not? One more time. One more time. And coming to rest on number 39. So, the odds of getting all three numbers are 60 times 60 times 60. While you figure that out, I'll say this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. You can be part of the show by downloading the Voice Byte app at voicebyte.com and using the hashtag Skeptic Zone. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Okay, the X-Files new season has just started with the premise that the government may wipe out humanity with a pathogen to recolonise another planet. So hooly-dooly, heavy stuff. Earth is dying and they need to cull the human race to make sure we don't take too many to the new planet. But is this complete Hollywood fantasy? Or would the government keep secrets like this from the general public? Richard Saunders, he joins us every week. Welcome, Richard.
Hello, Richard.
Welcome. Imagine if a government was that competent.
Boom, tish, bang, knocked us over with the first line.
Oh, I love it.
That is fantastic stuff, Richard. Hey, you know how...
Thank you and good night.
Thank you and good night. I mean, there's no need for you to continue now. I mean, he's here all week.
We can't